That makes sense.
I have unfortunately often get asked all kinds of questions sometimes, and you have to say, well, look, this is an open investigation to protect the integrity of that investigation. We're not going to divulge what I can tell you, and that type of thing. So,
okay.
I have no problem telling you.
I figured.
And then you can edit that however you want type thing. So
you could just be like, no comment.
No comment. I try not to say no comment a lot because that's turned into, especially in the media realm, when you hear someone say no comment, that's turned into kind of people immediately assume that that's something you don't want to talk about. And there's a reason
almost
why.
Like you're hiding something.
Yeah. So I think it's our duty to provide the information that we can provide. At times, everything that we do in law enforcement will see the light of day at some point in time.
Right.
It's just at different phases.
Yeah.
And so when we initially get a complaint, there is information that's public. When we make an arrest, additional information becomes public.
Yeah.
When the trial happens, additional information becomes public, and then finally, when it's all over, the whole everything becomes public. And if you think about it, so much gets posted to social media and put in the public eye now. When we have a very serious case that's occurring, or in all cases are serious to the people that are involved in them, you don't necessarily want certain facts to get out in the public sphere before they get in front of a jury, because when they're trying to pick a jury and they ask questions like, what do you know about this case? And a person says, well, I already heard this, and I already know this, and well, have you made your mind up? Well, no, I haven't made my mind up yet, but I have heard all that information. We try to avoid that if possible. So, but ultimately the information belongs to the public. We're doing it on the public's behalf, and at some point in time we will, end up releasing all of it. So.
Okay. Well, that is unopened water, if you like that.
Great,
so that's for you. Go ahead and introduce yourself. There you go.
Brought my trusty City of Delaware
Represent
cup there, so.
Delaware town. I like it. Go ahead and introduce yourself. That way people know who you are and what you do.
Sure. And if I can ask, am I supposed to look at you during this event, or look over there, or what? How do we
introducing yourself? You can look at your camera. Your screen's upside down at the moment.
Okay.
So that's what's zoomed in on you. So you can look there, and then we'll just
great, Sam.
Dive in.
My name is Adam Moore, and I'm the chief of police for the city of Delaware.
And how long you been chief for?
I've been chief. I was the interim chief about May of 2022, and got the permanent appointment in September of 2022. So we're coming up on 3 years.
That's cool. So previously we had coffee a few weeks ago.
We did.
Kind of just like navigating what this whole podcast would look like. And I told you when we had coffee, but for people who listen, it's funny because typically, like, I've had strangers come on the show, be like, hey, you wrote in a book, or, you're I had a semi-pro bass fisherman on. It's like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And you were the first person, which made sense because you're the chief of police. Made sense. You emailed me back and you're like, hey, how about we get a cup of coffee? I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
It's we often recommend folks, if you meet somebody online or somebody reaches out to you online, meet them in a public place first. Go kind of
make sure
feel the water.
Crazy,
So it got to take a little bit of my own advice there, right? So
Well, I'm glad you didn't turn out to be like a complete crazy person. And same thing on my table too. We vibed pretty well. We met at Coffeeology, great coffee joint. So I know we talked about a lot of topics as far as like what this podcast would go, and I kind of, with everything that's been recent the past couple of weeks, I would love to hear your input, and we'll get to those just as far as like the protesting and rioting and like what a police officer's main role is, and you being chief of police, like your main role. So to dive in, what is a typical week for the chief of police? What do you feel like your main responsibilities are? And then also, working with police officers as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, in general terms, my main responsibilities are to be the chief executive officer and administrator of the police department. And so ultimately I'm responsible for all of our operations and that type of thing. A typical week, I usually work my posted hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 with an hour off for lunch. But usually I'm in the office somewhere between 7 and 8 in the morning. And, depending upon the day, I get out of there 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. Every other Monday is council, so I have council meetings. And, I will tell you that the interesting thing about police work is you come in with a set agenda. I typically have, an Outlook calendar, and my administrative assistant helps me keep that. But you come in, you sit down 5 minutes into your day, the radio crackles, and they say, "Chief, we just had a robbery downtown or a major incident." And sometimes those incidents aren't even criminal. Dump truck pulled power lines out, and all of downtown and the high school has no power. We have no traffic signals. We need to set up a detour. And, a lot of my job is, along with our staff, is behind the scenes managing those situations and supporting the men and women that are on the front line who are out there trying to, take care of the problem.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, I laugh. I say, I don't do a lot of police work anymore. I make sure we have toilet paper and urinal mints at the police department. But there is that part of it. I control the budget. I make sure the lights are on. I make sure we have cruisers to drive. Make sure that the building is there and functional. Work with other city departments on the overall city plans of what is going on. I'm a liaison with the city manager's office, so all of those kind of things. Try to stay up on emerging topics and think about. You mentioned some of the First Amendment activity that's been going on across the country. Kind of trying to look ahead and foresee what is on the horizon and what we need to be preparing for, and be ready to and equipped to deal with.
So I'm going to use that term from now on, like First Amendment rights, because that sounds much more professional. So, so in navigating First Amendment rights, aka protesting, speaking your language, sharing what you're passionate about and stuff. Obviously, there's been a lot of that going around in the country, and people are very passionate about it. But something we had talked about, how like sometimes government level doesn't necessarily affect the local level. So in regards to, like, I don't know if it's like different styles or different types of First Amendment practices. How do you navigate that? Because people don't need a permit, right?
Right.
That they can just...
Yeah, the permit's called the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. That's the permit. For them to be in public places to exercise their First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a right that's without limitations. The Supreme Court has said that cities, municipalities, local governments can place time and manner restrictions on, First Amendment. So, if I think that to get my point across, I'm going to set a bonfire in the city park, that's probably not going to be permitted.
Yeah.
If we, and one of the things that we do in law enforcement, I always tell folks that, my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins.
Yeah.
And so when you're exercising your rights, part of our job is to ensure that everybody can exercise their rights. And so if you're out on a public sidewalk and you're engaging in First Amendment activity, other folks have a right to use that public sidewalk to get through town, to use the streets to get through town or what have you. And so your right to exercise your First Amendment right doesn't override their right to be able to walk down the street and go into a business or what have you. So we work to balance that. Certainly folks can be out here, they can be spreading their message, but we need to keep the sidewalks clear.
Yeah.
You can't build things on the sidewalks that would obstruct people from exercising their rights. And, the police, we tend to, in interestingly, you caught on the fact that I say First Amendment activity, and part of that is, depending on what side of an issue you're on, it might be a protest to you, or it might be exercising your rights. And I know that's a sleight of words, but I mean, there are individuals sometimes who think, well, I only think that should be allowed if those folks agree with me. And from the police department standpoint, we're content neutral. The duty we have is the duty to the law and the duty to allowing folks to be able to engage in their rights in a meaningful way. Now, with that being said, there's also kind of some debate about, I have to make sure, my duty is to make sure that you have the ability to exercise your First Amendment rights. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have a duty to make you comfortable doing that. And so if you're out exercising your First Amendment rights, there is the possibility that someone else who has the counter view may decide to exercise their First Amendment rights at the same time. And, you may feel that that's intimidating. That other person yelled back at me. But again, that's two citizens that are engaging in their rights, and we're content neutral. So, sometimes doing certain things can be uncomfortable.
I feel like that could be now, luckily and by grace, I've never seen like any like serious issues arise from people exercising their First Amendment rights and such. But there's also that aspect of safetyness, like you said, content neutral. There's no left or right. There's no one side or the other side. It's providing that sense of safetyness for everybody so that they can exercise what they're passionate about. In navigating that, what's the process for like beginning to plan like the safety protocols, just so that, because they have a right to do what they want to say, and with certain limitations, if you will, but what's the process for like providing safety for both people, and what's an example that it could get out of hand where force does have to be applied?
First Amendment, peaceful protest, you'll hear that term thrown out there a lot. What I can tell you is not peaceful protest is damaging other people's property, setting fires, overturning cars, physically assaulting folks, threatening folks with violence. All of those things kind of step over the line and become criminal activity, which are things that we will address. So, one of the things that's important for a police officer is to kind of stay alert to what current events are. And we have several different things that are going on in our country right now that there are people that either agree with or disagree with. Some folks are vehemently disagree with it and are exercising their rights. So we understand that there may be First Amendment activity, folks out protesting. And so we start to monitor those things. We try to do our very best to monitor kind of social media feeds and those types of things to see if there's any potential threats of violence relative to our community. And then on the day of, we will certainly monitor those events for safety on both sides. Safety of folks that are engaging in their protest, to make sure that they're not being accosted, people that maybe are counter protesters or have a counter view, and then safety for people that are just going on about their daily business, so that they're not in danger of being harmed by whatever the protest is doing. So we kind of monitor that. Now, one of the things that's really been kind of successful is, and I often get calls from folks that are planning, hey, next Saturday we want to have a protest downtown, and they'll call the police department and they'll ask the question, do I need a permit?
Oh, okay.
A lot of folks want to do the right thing, and so they'll reach out to us. And in those situations, what we do is we try to engage with those folks, let them know that part of our duty is to make sure that they can engage in this behavior, but kind of here's the rules, the do's and don'ts. You can't block the sidewalk, you can't block the street, those types of things. But try to build a relationship. And then oftentimes if we don't hear from them ahead of time, what we'll do is the day of, our supervisor will stop out and see if there's an organized leader or a loose leader of the and kind of have that conversation and say, hey, we're here to support you engaging in your constitutional rights. That's our role in the community. So but here's some of the pitfalls where this could go wrong. And then if we have a situation where we have counter protesters show up, we do the exact same thing.
Same process. The board.
And then what we try to do is, mediate the best we can to try to avoid some type of, flash situation. So, hey, can you folks be on that side of the street and you folks stay on this side of the street? Understanding you're both out here. You're both passionate about what you're sharing. You're both engaging in your rights. We want you to do that, but we also don't want anybody to be harmed in this situation.
Yeah. Speaking of, so when we grabbed coffee, it was very quickly realized on my end how relational you are with people. I mean, we were sitting there talking to random people up, hey Chief, how you doing? Hey Chief, how you doing? Oh, hey Chief, how you doing? Which I'm sure is a very honoring piece, part of the role, that people know who you are. They honor you and your position and role. And I feel like even Delaware has always been really good at that piece.
Yeah. To be honest with you, Sam, that's a dream come true for me, right? I grew up, when I got into this work, I kind of thought, boy, I'd love to be that chief in a small town where, I walk up on Monday morning to the coffee shop and, I see the barber, I see the banker, I see all the fellow community members, and so that's a dream come true for me.
Yeah.
So, but I think police work in general is very relational, and it's, at the local level, you have to be a people person to be in this, because you're really getting involved in people's lives, good and bad, and oftentimes the worst day of somebody's life.
So the relational piece, I found it because it was one of those things, like when you talked about that, it was one of those things where I was aware, but then hearing it kind of like was a different perspective. So when you're being relational on let's say like both sides of different parties who believe different things, what's that aspect look like as far as building a relationship with people? And because you really have to be, like you said, that content neutral, that neutral voice, that neutral person. So what's that?
I think it starts with being honest and being genuine. And I think that's the first part of starting that relationship. Now, I will tell you, when it comes to the topic that we're talking about, it is a challenging road for an officer to walk, because I'm going to, let's just, for an example, I'm going to use, we have a KKK rally comes to town, and we have their rally, and we have counter protesters that show up. Now, I am not aware of any officers that align themselves with the KKK's message.
Yeah.
But now here we are downtown on the street. We have to be content neutral. I just explained the process whereby we're going to go up and explain the rules to everybody involved. But an officer is over talking to someone from the KKK and is having a friendly conversation with them, genuine conversation. What does that look like to the folks that are there to counter protest?
Yeah.
It looks like that officer, they're being awful friendly over there with those guys, and and the reality is we're trying to have a relationship with the parties to make sure that the law is followed.
Yeah.
We're not there to agree with or disagree or support either one of those messages. And ultimately, that's a difficult. The optics of that can be difficult.
Yeah, I love. So my friend Chris, he said one time, he's like, the goal of communication is to not be right or wrong, but to understand. And I think in that line, if you were dealing with both parties, the goal is to understand and to communicate, whether right or wrong, agree, disagree. That's I personally would be like, all right, you guys need to leave. Like, nobody likes the KKK, you know? So it'd be hard for me even to navigate that professionally, because, I mean, come on, you know, it's an organization that's just
well,
wrong.
and I think that's, you know, again, our duty is to the law.
Yeah.
And it is not to any one organization. It's just our duty is to the law.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there so obviously there's training in dealing with that, but I'm curious to know, like, what does the training look like for a police officer who's coming into the academy and then, you know, put out into the world, and like what's the training process with that? Is it just like, do you go through steps like be calm, collective, like engage in conversation, be relational, again, the law piece?
I think that you go through that. There's several pieces of the training that you go through that become part of that. You know, officers go through cultural sensitivity training. Officers go through de-escalation training. Officers go through training to understand that we deal with a wide range of situations when we're out there. I mean, I tell people all the time, the Delaware Police Department's a full-service police department. We handle parking tickets all the way up to homicides. And oftentimes you'll hear folks say, well, don't you have anything better to do?
Yeah.
Well, for whatever, if you call us, Sam, if you call us for help, whatever you've called us for, officers need to understand that's the most important thing in Sam's life at that moment.
Right.
Right. And of our other 45,000 residents, there may be somebody who goes, you know, that's really not that important. Why are we sending the police there?
Yeah.
Right. And so officers are taught and trained to understand that that's the most important thing that's going on in your life.
Yeah.
But again, there are strategies. It just came to my mind. There's a large portion of the academy spent on dealing with domestic relations and dealing with family disputes. And, you know, again, it's another situation where officers have to be content neutral. They have a duty to the law. They have a duty to make sure people are safe. It's not me coming to your house and saying, well, you know, I agree with what he says, or I agree with what she says. And, you know, oftentimes, personally, I've been on calls where I don't agree with anybody there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what I have to look at is how can I apply the law in this situation? What's legal, what's not legal, and how can we resolve this situation so everybody walks away and is safe and can move on to the next day for the conflict. Not always easy.
So is it the number one, would you say it's like the number one priority to always de-escalate a situation before an arrest is made? Like, if you can meet that balance, if no laws are being broken, and
absolutely.
You know, okay.
Absolutely. If folks are at a very high emotional state, they may not be thinking rationally.
Yeah.
And you know, we have phrases in our vernacular when we say, you know, oh, I'm so mad I couldn't see straight. Well, that comes from the fact that when people are extremely emotional or very upset, they may not be rationally thinking about the situation. So anything we can do to bring that down, and you know, I'm going to go back to my days of, I was a crisis negotiator, used to be called a hostage negotiator. But one of the things there is those are really emotionally charged situations, and one of the techniques that we use is we try to buy time to allow that person who's engaging in really significant criminal activity to come back to a rational thought process.
Yeah.
If possible.
How long were you a hostage negotiator?
Oh, goodness.
And was it for Delaware?
It was for Delaware. We have a multi-agency crisis negotiation team in the county that's made up of officers from the sheriff's office, the city of Powell, and we utilize those officers. They get called out on an as-needed basis anywhere in the county. And I did that probably 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Give or take.
Have you had any on the higher end serious situations where it was a very lengthy process?
Was involved in one situation where I was not the primary negotiator, I was the secondary negotiator, and it went for almost 24 hours.
Wow.
Now that individual was holding themselves hostage in the sense that they wanted to cause self-harm and maybe harm neighbors and folks at their house. So we were there trying to ultimately get them out, to get them to help, and that's typically how those things go.
What are some tactics in dealing with that? Like, are you taught certain phrases or keywords to pay attention to? And...
Yeah. One of the things, again, back to relational. And I tell folks all the time, we would always get called to scenes of significance for crisis negotiation, and I would show up, and it was almost like that scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan goes, "These aren't the droids you're looking for." Like we showed up like we had this master of the Force. We were going to be able to talk to this person, and the reality is, you use the same skills and techniques that officers use on a daily basis. You actively listen to folks. You listen to what they say, and then you respond. And there's different techniques. You can use I statements. Sam, what I just heard you say, I feel uncomfortable about it. I feel, allow the other person to understand how they're making others feel, or try to explain to them. Paraphrasing back so that they know that you heard them. There's a technique that is called, a strategic pause, which is basically where you allow silence to be a technique. Sometimes people want to get something off their chest and then just kind of let it hang there. Let it sit. Yeah. So, all of those techniques they teach you, but the reality is it's just learning to listen to people and respond to people and talk less, which it sounds a little counterproductive since I'm here kind of hogging the mic and telling you all these things.
That's
right?
what this is for. So yeah, I'm just the guy to ask questions.
Right, right. Yeah. But those are skills that, again, a fender bender.
Yeah.
You show up, you have two citizens who were going about their day, did not expect to get in a fender bender. And this happens, and gosh, and then you always have to be cognizant too of what the backstory is too. Maybe you don't know that person got up, they're late to work, they got in a fight with their kids didn't want to get on the bus and go to school. They're running late, they spilled their coffee, and now they got someone accidentally ran into the back of them at a red light. It could be really,
things happen.
Things happen. And people, and when they happen, we've all been in there. We're like, and so you're going to show up as an officer. Now, no one's taking anybody hostage. This isn't, one of these crazy movies that you see, The Heist or anything like that. This is an everyday occurrence, but you show up and you got a person who's upset with the fact that they ran into the back of somebody. You got someone who's upset that they got ran into. They're both the officer's got to get there and defuse that situation, de-escalate it, get it resolved. What's lawful, what's not lawful here, maybe issue a citation, resolve all of that. That takes an element of crisis negotiation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That works. That works.
But there's a lot of people. I tell people, one of the jokes that I often say is I spent time managing JCPenney stores.
Oh, okay.
Prior to being in law enforcement full time, and I'm going to date myself here, but I was there at the height of the Tickle Me Elmo craze, and I remember on a Christmas Eve, a mom had ordered a Tickle Me Elmo through the catalog, and the truck didn't come in, or it wasn't on the truck. I don't know the specifics, but the bottom line was we didn't have Tickle Me Elmo, and explaining to that mother that we didn't have Tickle Me Elmo after she ordered it on Christmas morning, that was rougher than anything I've ever done in law enforcement. Right?
Yeah.
But it's the same type of skills.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Folks that have worked in service industries, if you've waited tables, you've done exactly what police officers do.
Yeah. Okay.
You've dealt with people, provided them service. Sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
Those same type of skills of connecting with folks, allowing them to know that you understand and that you care about what's going on in their lives. Those are important things.
Yeah. Now, so in police officers being officers, I actually had, last Saturday, just this past Saturday, I was coming home from filming an event, and there was a police cruiser on the highway. We're just driving, and the speed limit was like, I think 60. So he was going 60. I was going like 63, 64. And we were driving, and I got just like to the half midway of his car, and he started flickering his blue lights. So I'm thinking, oh, maybe, am I getting a ticket? And so I began to slow down, but it was so that he had time to get over and get onto the off ramp. But it was one of those situations like, why didn't he just speed up? Why did he flick his lights? So in regards to that, sometimes you'll see police officers sitting at a red light or sitting at, an embankment on a highway, and people think, to what you said, like, well, why does this matter? Why are they doing this? Right. So I would love for you to kind of like break that down as to like what the general purpose is for those types of situations.
Yeah. So
and why officers do that.
Yeah. We have those lights to allow us to get through traffic, to alert others to our presence. We use them for safety, but everybody has been in that situation where you're sitting at the red light next to the police officer, and he turns the lights on, he goes through the red light, and he turns them off.
Yeah,
whoop whoop, and you got that down pretty good. Yep. The whoop whoop. Yeah. And you think to yourself, oh my gosh, Dunkin' Donuts having a sale, is it over in the next, like what? I wish I could do that. Right. And I think there's it's a human nature to automatically, whenever we see someone go to the head of a line or we do something, we tend to go to the deepest, darkest place.
We get like a little tense, like,
right.
They're entitled,
right. That person cut me off. We don't go the opposite side and say, oh, maybe they just didn't see me, right? We always ascribe a motive to it. But what I can tell you is sometimes we have to use those lights and we have to use the siren to get us to someplace quicker, but we don't necessarily want people to know that we're coming. And the example I often use is if you were a bank teller and you're in the bank and suddenly a person comes in and produces a gun and says, I'm robbing the bank, and if you call the police, I'm going to shoot you. But as soon as you saw the gun, you used your foot to hit the button on the floor that triggers the silent alarm. Now you're standing there thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, are the cops coming? Like, woo, 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 right? And so we want to get to that situation quickly, but we may not want to have that siren going for blocks and blocks and blocks because we don't want that robber necessarily to know that we're coming.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the impetus behind that. We have to move around the city and get around the city, but it's not always in situations where we want to have that siren going and air horn blowing and all of those types of things. So.
Yeah. And again, going back to like that safety piece, when you see an officer sitting in the middle of a highway, like your first instinct, like if you're speeding, you're going to slow down because you don't want a ticket.
Yeah. Well, and I tell folks that, that's the overall goal is we want voluntary compliance from folks, right? Listen, people don't always take well to getting a speeding citation.
Yeah.
And they often voice their displeasure
at
getting a speeding citation. So that is not necessarily a comfortable situation for either them or the officer.
Yeah.
And you have to think, gosh, boy, I'm sitting here, I'm in my police cruiser, my job's to slow people down, I've got my radio on, I'm having a great day. Man, I just feel like I want to pull someone over and walk up there and let them yell at me for 10 minutes about how I have better things to do. And this is, so sometimes the officer knows that they're trying to gain voluntary compliance, maybe they're just eating their lunch. Now, if I'm going to eat my lunch and I know part of my job is to slow people down, where can I go park and eat my lunch and then also slow people down? Well, I can go park in the crossover of a freeway. So they may or may not be sitting there looking to give you a ticket.
Yeah.
However, this is where our job becomes challenging, because let me change the facts a little bit. When if you're the person that you're speeding, which you shouldn't be doing, and you get stopped by the officer and he gives you a citation and you think to yourself, gosh, doesn't he have something better to be doing? He shouldn't be doing something out there. Now, juxtapose that against a person who's had a child killed by a speeding motorist. In their world, that's the most important thing that we should be doing.
Yeah.
And in a way, it is, because we're out trying to keep people safe. And so you have all these opposing views as to what officers should be doing with their time on a daily basis. And it's all important.
Yeah.
It's all important.
Yeah. Side question, and I'm just now thinking of this. Do cops have a quota?
Well, interesting that you should say that.
Okay.
Because current events, there's currently a law that is making its way through the General Assembly. I think it's actually gone through the Senate and the House now to outlaw quotas in Ohio.
Okay.
I think that was is directed at some really specific problem points, that there were places where people felt that there were officers had quotas, or there was evidence that they were using quotas. But I've never worked for a department that has quotas. Never been told you have to write this many tickets, or you're going to get fired, or if you write this many tickets at the end of the month, you get tickets to Cedar Point or what. And never been in there. Now, what I will tell you as your chief of police, and as being responsible for managing it, if I have an officer that goes out and, let's say, they do their entire work week and they don't write any warnings, they don't write any tickets, they don't take any reports, they don't take any crash reports, we look at the log and they haven't got out and talked to any citizens. Well, they come in at the end of the week and we go, well, hey, what exactly did you do?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is an element of, and that's not a quota, and we don't tell folks to go out and, hey, you need to go out and write this many tickets, or you need to go out and give this many warnings, but we do encourage our people that we are taxpayer funded, and it's important for the taxpayer to get an honest day's work for an honest day's pay.
Okay.
And so, I think part of our job in leadership is to explain the importance of enforcement, to explain the importance of giving people warnings and being actively involved in some of these things. And the way I look at it too is that you have a tool belt, and a written warning's a tool on the belt. A verbal warning is a tool on the belt. A citation's a tool on the belt. So when we're out there, if I see you speeding, I can pull any one of those tools and use it with the ultimate goal of getting you to voluntarily comply with the law.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes what happens is, you'll run into somebody who is speeding, and you'll run the plate in the computer and find out, gosh, well, that person got stopped a month ago and got a verbal warning, and they got stopped 2 weeks ago and the officer gave them a written warning, and now I've got them stopped. We're not getting the voluntary compliance, so now maybe I need to jump to this, maybe a citation situation, because we tried those other tool too and they didn't work. And so really the goal is just voluntary compliance. I went
I think it was like 3.5, maybe 4 years without ever getting a citation, and then in 1 month I got 4. It was like 2 for seatbelts. So I always had a thing for whatever reason, I always forgot to get new tags on my car. And it was like, it's your birthday. Like, your birthday's when you get new tags. And it just always slipped my mind. So that was 2 of the tickets. And then the other 2 was like a stop and go at a stop sign. And the other one was a seatbelt. And what was funny is I was driving down 71, getting off at the 36, 37 Sunbury exit. And cop pulled me over, and he's like, why I pulled you over? And I was like, no. He's like, you were speeding? I was like, oh, okay. And he asked something like, have you gotten any previous tickets or something like that? And I was like, yeah, I've gotten a few. Well, he went back to his car, ran plates, I'm assuming, whatever. And he came back and he was kind of laughing. He was like, you got 4 this month. And I was like, listen, it's like, they were petty.
It's a rough spell.
It was,
here,
yeah,
right?
it was just, it was a bad month. And, I ended up getting a ticket, but I found that humorous because he came back like kind of chuckling, like kind of messing with me a little bit. He was like, you got 4 this month. And I was like, I'm sorry. It's just a busy month. So, but yeah. So changing gears a little bit, when First Fridays happen downtown Delaware, those are huge events. Huge, thousands of people show up. Thousands of people come ready to engage and support local businesses. What's the protocol for that for the police department to provide safety, kind of navigate traffic, and making sure the area in itself is safe for everybody?
Yeah.
So I don't think, because again, behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you bring this up because we have July 4th is coming up here in the city of Delaware, and we're working on it now. I think we're taping this podcast on June 19th, so we're a little less than a month out, but we're working on that. That's a huge event. We have a lot of people come down for our parade, our symphony orchestra, and fireworks. But First Friday is another example of special events, and I will tell you, Sam, that has changed over the course of my career.
Okay.
And it has changed based on current circumstances and what we now know are threats to folks or bad actors trying to do things that they to disrupt those types of things.
Side question: how do you know what's changing as far as like the bad things? And
well, a lot of the challenge is what we know is there are things that you can think of that go, boy, this would be really bad. And you have to find the balance of, do we think that's going to happen? Is that likely to happen? It could happen.
Okay.
Because you can't necessarily prepare for everything that could happen.
Right.
But what likely would happen. The springtime in Ohio, we have to think about tornadoes and severe weather. There are other parts of the country that don't have to worry about that, right? There are parts of the country where they don't have to worry about extreme snowfall. So that's kind of that. Well, could we get a could it snow in Florida? Well, yes,
it could.
Is it likely? And that's where we kind of go through that process also. But also to your point, years ago, if we were going to have a street festival, we would just put up road closed signs. Roads closed, we're having a street festival. And I will tell you that we didn't think a whole lot about any dangers when it came to vehicles. Nice, France happened, where you've got a bad actor drives into a crowd, which really drew our attention to the fact that this is something that likely could happen, and we need to mitigate that. And if you notice, when you come down, we have barricades, we have vehicles parked in particular ways, and that all goes to, hey, rightfully, or I don't want to say rightfully, accidentally, a person driving through could have a medical emergency and veer off and come into this crowd, or someone with bad intent could purposely go into that, and we need to prepare for that. So that's kind of that process that we go through. Is we get the information that we're going to have an event, we gauge how many people we think are going to come to the event, what type of event it is. Where's it being held? Is it right next to a major highway? Is it on a side street? Is it in a neighborhood? Is it in an open park? And then what we start to do is we start listing down everything bad that could happen, which is, kind of morbid, but morbid, depressing job, right?
But you kind of have to do it, you know.
And then what we do is we have a list of all these bad things that could happen, and then we start to go, okay, is this likely?
Okay.
Oh, well, that one's not so much likely. Is this well, that's really likely. And then we work on strategies, whether that be with equipment or staffing or working with the event coordinator to change the event a little bit to mitigate those potential risks. And there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah.
But it's all behind the scenes work. And it's work that if we do our job right, no one ever knows.
Right.
It's the dog that never barks, right? Everyone goes to the event, has a great time, doesn't necessarily see us, doesn't see some of the things that we put in place to keep it safe, and they go on about their lives, and that's the way we love it.
Yeah. A quote kind of like, a quiet day is a good day.
Absolutely.
So
except we don't use the quiet word. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So in partnerships, does the Delaware police partner with Powell and Dublin for bigger events, more
Yes. Okay. We have a group in Delaware County called DCLE, which is the Delaware County Law Enforcement Executives, which is the chief officer of any particular police agency, and including the sheriff, the prosecutor for the county. And we meet regularly once a month. And that group oversees all of our multi-agency teams. So we have a multi-agency tactical team. We have a multi-agency child abduction response team. Our drone teams are now starting to work together. I mentioned the crisis negotiation team that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. Not one of our agencies has enough resources to have one of those teams fully equipped and staffed alone. Okay. And so we share officers. So our tactical team, which is SWAT for folks that most people are familiar with that term. That team has got over 20 members on it, and they are made up of, there's 6 Delaware police officers on that team. Okay. And then there's X number from the sheriff's office in the city of Westerville, the city of Dublin, city of Powell. Okay. But we meet as a group to kind of discuss about issues that we're having across the county, and then manage those teams. And then ultimately, all of those agencies work together in the event. We have a major special event where we need lots and lots and lots of people. Okay. What comes to mind is during election season, during a presidential election year, we may have candidates who arrive in Delaware County, mm-hmm. either in the city or somewhere else in the county, to give a campaign speech and draw a lot of people. And we need, especially if the president of the United States is coming, mm-hmm. it requires a lot of bodies to facilitate one of those visits, and more bodies than I have alone here at the police department. So I would be reaching out to the sheriff's office or these other cities and say, hey, we have a presidential visit coming and we're going to need help. Yeah.
Yeah. How many presidents have you met?
So I've actually met 2 presidents, a first lady, and several Congress senators, and I'm trying to think of Ryan Seacrest has been to town, so you get to meet
little celebrity status.
It's interesting being in police work. You get to meet all kinds of different people that come and are famous for a variety of different reasons. Yeah, and so we've had. President Clinton. I've met President Clinton. I've met President Trump. They've come through town. Okay. And it's just I think no matter what your politics are, it's interesting to meet famous people. Yeah. And meet people that hold the office. So again, law enforcement's allowed me to do that. So.
Yeah, that's cool. So I kind of want to talk about a little bit of the tactical side of things. So for covering events, if a serious situation were to happen, I call them sharpshooters, but you had a different name for them.
Yeah, sharpshooters works, but sniper observer teams, folks that are very proficient with particular types of weapon systems. Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, and like kind of, I know you emphasize like the drone technology that the police force uses and has, and like what's a situation that you would use something like that?
So, I think the misnomer about sniper observer teams, everyone focuses on the rifle and this, this guy is up high somewhere to take this shot and take somebody out. That is a very small portion of their job.
Yeah.
The observer side is like 90% of it, right? Oftentimes those teams, although they are very good with the rifle, they provide what we call overwatch, and that is where they can be in an elevated position and observe the crowds for all kinds of things. And they can observe for strange behavior. They can observe for dangerous behavior. They can also observe for, hey, we just got a report that there's a missing child, and can anybody see, they've got a bird's eye view of this event. Can anybody see the 5-year-old in the red shirt? He just went missing from here. And they're like, oh, we can see him, and they can direct officers into that situation.
Yeah.
They can alert folks, our people on the ground, when you can see the entire crowd, if there's trouble brewing. Hey, it looks like there might be some people having a disagreement on the north end of the event. We need to get some folks up there, which is the same thing that we use our drone for a lot of times. And it's kind of interesting. The drone program, people immediately think surveillance, and the police are, they're flying over my house, they're watching me. But the reality is we use that in large part for the ability to search an area for trouble, a large area, quickly, or again, a missing child, a missing adult. We've used our drone to fly over and assist the fire department at a house fire with locating hot spots with the thermal imager. We've used that to map serious crash scenes from the air to take very specific measurements from an aerial view to help us process and investigate a crash. So it's not necessarily what everyone always thinks when they go, oh gosh, the police are sneaking and peeking with their drone.
It's from Hollywood movies, man. I'm telling you,
right.
It's all from Hollywood.
Well, and that's another problem that we have is I attest that there are more TV shows and movies made about police work than any other profession, which makes our job difficult, because if you base what you think we're doing or how we do things off of what you see on TV, this might be news, but you'll be severely wrong. And oftentimes we can't solve a major caper in 45 minutes minus commercial breaks.
Right.
Or everyone now thinks DNA, CSI, some of the things that you see on these shows, they believe your local police utilize in every situation. And so, if you come home and you're the unfortunate victim of having your mailbox pushed over or knocked down, and you say, well, gosh, can we just get DNA off of this and find out who
fingerprints
find out who the person this is? And it's like, well, that's a really expensive test. It's going to cost the city a lot of money. It's difficult. We got to balance that. And then there are databases out there, but there's like this no big national computer that you can just put the fingerprint in and it goes beep. This is your guy, which oftentimes you see on TV.
Honestly, you saying that makes me, I know I've had thoughts like that's probably how that works. They just get a print and it's a national database and they just, there's the guy, So it does not work that way.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah. So, there are databases that you can compare fingerprints to, but someone had to do something to get their fingerprints into that database, right? So there are people out there that we don't have their fingerprints on file. So I say all that to say, I'm not this isn't a podcast to tell people how to commit crime, right?
Like, yeah.
I'm going to tell you, we will get you.
Yes.
But I say that it's a little bit more complicated than what you see on TV sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not complicated at all.
Yeah.
Sometimes our job is common sense. I remember we have a university in town, and I can remember getting loud noise complaints or underage drinking complaints, and you arrive at a dorm room, mm-hmm. and you knock on the door, and some of those dorm rooms are probably smaller than your bathroom, Sam.
Yeah.
And it takes the people 15 minutes to get to the door. And all you hear while you're waiting for them to answer the door is glass bottles clinking together,
rattling around, and
they open the door, and they're kind of surprised to see that it's you, and you say, "Hey, what's going on here?" And they go, "Oh, nothing, just studying, right?" There's a common sense part of our job too.
Yeah.
And an example I heard used in court one time that kind of illustrates that point. If you were babysitting a niece or nephew who's 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, and you're in the living room and you hear a crash from the kitchen, and you go out to the kitchen and you see a chair pushed over to the counter and that niece or nephew standing on the chair, and a cabinet door up near the ceiling is opened, and the cookie jar that is in that cabinet normally is on the ground smashed. Do you need DNA?
Right.
Do we need DNA hit off of that cookie jar to determine what happened, or is there probable cause, which is what the Constitution requires of us? Is there probable cause to believe that child tried to get that cookie jar? Right.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, it's important to remember, I need probable cause to issue you the papers to get you into the court system. That doesn't mean that you're guilty. That just means that I have reasons to believe that it's probable that you did this thing that's a violation of law.
Okay.
Then you go to court, and it's up to either a judge or a jury of your peers to determine whether or not there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you did that, and they decide ultimately whether you did the thing or not.
Okay.
Well, I should say they decide ultimately whether or not the thing that you did is a crime. So
okay.
Because you may have done something, and ultimately at the end of the day, the jury says, "Yeah, we don't think that's a crime."
Okay.
Or it doesn't meet the elements of a crime.
Okay. How much? So, in kind of partnering with that topic, how much of a police officer, or even your position, operate from a place of just kind of like common sense or facts?
So facts are the most important thing.
Okay.
And our job in most situations is to be a fact finder.
Mm-hmm.
And we get those facts. It's not our job to take sides per se. I will tell you that we are victim-centric in the sense that our job, if you call us and say, "Gosh, I was just robbed at gunpoint," our role is to support you through that. But as we're doing that, our job is to obtain objective facts to show that that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And those facts sometimes can benefit the victim, and sometimes they can benefit the person that's being accused of committing a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not our responsibility to decide one way or the other. It's to present both those facts in an objective way, and ultimately let the court or the jury to decide.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, kind of like piecing another piece off of that. So we had talked about, like, how important it is for cops to be, more on the relational piece with people. But being relational can also create relationships with people to navigate like the probable cause or distinguish more facts for like maybe like an ongoing case, or, if something happens. So kind of elaborate on that a little bit and share a situation, if you can, on how being relational, building relationships with, with a store manager or someone who works at a gas station, and that could help like navigate,
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways that can happen. That's important to have a relationship and to have trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is a major component of having a relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're talking about, when we met for coffee, I gave the example of, and it's kind of funny too, because it also goes to a misconception of police. I mean, how many times have you've driven by a gas station or someplace and you look in and there's the cop standing in there next to the counter and he's got a cup of coffee.
Oh yeah.
And you think to yourself, I mean, man, taxes just keep going up and those guys make a lot of money. What are we paying this guy to do? Stand here and talk to the clerk at the UDF station?
Yeah.
I mean, again, we get those calls as police bosses, we get those calls. But if I stop in at the UDF on my patrol route and I build a relationship with the clerk to the point that the clerk trusts me and she knows me, and that's Adam, and he's a nice guy, and I know he has kids that go to the high school, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
We've got a relationship now because I've cultivated that. I've stopped in every night, I've talked to her, and I built this relationship. Well, now what happens is you have a situation where I get sent to a burglary in a neighborhood and someone's house gets broken into. They don't know who did it. They don't know why it was done. It was a random event, but a neighbor says, "Hey, I don't know if this helps or not, but I saw a little red Ford pickup leaving the neighborhood awful fast. It looked like it was in the victim's driveway, and it's got a bumper sticker on the back that says whatever. Or we don't know who it is. Did you get the license plate? No, I didn't get the license plate, but I saw that. Well, now when I am on my patrol route, well, gosh, if somebody's driving a little truck around town,
little red truck with a
bumper sticker, they need gas. And so who can I ask about whether they've seen this truck or not getting gas? Well, I can ask that clerk. But, that clerk is probably going to want to know, like, boy, if I give the officer information, are they going to put me, are they going to tell the other person? Are they going to put me in a bad situation? But I go into the gas station and I say, hey, have you ever seen a little red truck around here with a bumper sticker that says this on it? And the clerk says, oh, yeah, Officer Moore, I see that guy stops in here every Wednesday. Well, it may or may not be the guy we're looking for, but that's a clue. That's information.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way having relationships in the community is beneficial. It's helpful. The second way is when you get into some very serious crimes that have some serious stigma. Maybe you're a victim of sexual assault and you're asking questions of yourself like, is someone going to believe me? Are people going to look negatively at me if I come forward with this information?
Yeah.
Are people going to think that I brought this on myself? When victims have those thoughts running through their minds, it's easier for them to open up and give information to someone and talk about that situation if it's somebody they feel like they have some type of relationship with.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, very important. Now, the community also has to have a relationship. And I think this is one of the bad things that's happened to us as a society when it's come to, and again, we're sitting here having a podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna beat you up too bad about this, but this online world we live in now, a lot of people live in our community that don't know the neighbors that live next to them,
right,
on the left or the right. They have no relationship. And so when we get sent to that house for that burglary and we go, maybe your neighbor saw something, and you go, probably not. I don't even know who those neighbors are.
Yeah.
Right? Or in the sense that there's 45,000 people that live here, and I, as a police officer, can't know every one of them and know the whereabouts of every one of them.
Really? You can't do that?
It's helpful for when we get those calls that say, hey, I'm Mrs. Jones's neighbor, and she's 85 years old and lives by herself, and every morning, like clockwork, she raises her front blinds and turns the lights on, and today she didn't do it. I think there's a problem over there. That's the type of relationship that's helpful to the police, because I can't know all the Mrs. Joneses in town.
Right.
But someone calling us and giving us that information, we'll come right over, and there may be a problem there. And that's, again, that's that relationship we have to have with each other as a community.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. And it's important on a much larger level, too, that your police department has a relationship with the community as a whole.
Yeah.
Because policing is local. We've seen a lot of critique of the police and how they do their job across the country over the last 3 or 4 years. And not every community has the relationship with their police department that they should. And I'm very happy to say that I think our department has a really good relationship with our community, and we in turn both ways.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I know when we grabbed coffee, you shared a story, again, touching base on like that whole relational piece. Can you share the story about the high school officer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Can
absolutely.
We, so again, relational
well, I think it shows the height of relationship. When it goes well, this is what
and
you
being
get.
intentional
and
as
being
well.
intentional about that. And so I think the story I shared with you was had to do with one of our school resource officers was assigned to our 5th and 6th grade building years ago. It used to be at the Willis building at 74 West William Street. That was a 5-6 building. They've since it's the Willis Education Center now, and they've moved things around. But the school resource officer was assigned there and was approached by one of the principals at the school in regards to a student who was not coming to school. So it was a truancy issue, and the principal had some concerns as to why this student was not coming to school. And again, this starts out with the principal and the school resource officer had a relationship, and so the principal shared this information. So the school resource officer said, well, let me kind of look into this situation. And so on one of the days that the student didn't come to school, the SRO, the school resource officer, I'm going to refer to him as the SRO, got in his car and drove out to this student's house and knocked on the door and found that the student wasn't ill. There wasn't an issue really that the student should have been in school. And so the SRO brought the student to school and said, hey, I want you to understand that you need to come to school. It's the law in the state of Ohio. You need to come to school. You need to get up and come to school, and you need to be here. Well, that student's behavior really didn't change. And, as we kind of talked about in a couple other situations, when behavior doesn't change voluntarily, we start increasing the stakes or using other tools. And so it got to a point where the SRO basically said, I'm going to check every morning. And if you're not at school, I'm going to come to the house and pick you up and take you to school.
Yeah.
Every day. So understand,
just puts a little bit of pressure on.
If A happens, B is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what ended up happening. And that went on for probably about a week and a half until the student realized, I'm not going to be able to stay home. Right now, through this whole period, both the SRO and the principal are kind of having a little bit of in their mind, well, why aren't the parents making this student come to school? What's going on here? What's the backstory that's going on? Because this is really kind of outside the normal rails of what happens.
Right.
But ultimately, that student started coming to school, which is what we want. And when the student started coming to school, she had developed a relationship with the SRO all those early mornings of him coming and picking her up. She started coming to school. She started to develop a relationship with peers at school and with staff at the school. Once that relationship was built and she felt comfortable, she came forward and reported to school staff that mom's live-in boyfriend at home was routinely sexually assaulting her. If she had not been coming to school and had not built those relationships, I'm not sure that she would have told anybody.
Yeah.
Ultimately, police initiate an investigation. Goes through that investigation. They obtain the facts that we were talking about, and what she was telling was found to be true.
Yeah.
And that perpetrator is now in prison for a very, very long period of time.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is, while all of that was going on, one of the peers that she was friends with saw how she was treated and saw how well she was treated, and that peer came forward and disclosed their own sexual abuse at the hands of an adult, who then ultimately was prosecuted and incarcerated due to committing sexual assaults against that student. So I point that out to show that's the power of having a community-minded, relationship-minded officer, and who builds those community connections.
Yeah. Is it a random question? So SRO, is it normal or like kind of like their responsibility base if a child or kids aren't showing up to school, like they have a responsibility to go to that house and kind of like ensure the safety or figure out what's going on and, navigate all that?
So as a general rule, it's not necessarily their responsibility. There is, through the juvenile court in Delaware County, there's a truancy program where the juvenile court staff has people assigned to work on that specific problem.
Okay.
But I think where our SROs get involved is when there's kind of a really acute case or really kind of severe case, and school staff has that officer that works in the building every day and feels, they want to come and say, hey, this seems a little different than the run-of-the-mill teenage.
There's a trust factor.
Yeah, right.
There's a relational piece with the school and the SRO, and
and so then they'll get involved in those situations. They're like, this is a little bit outside the norm, than the average teenager who just doesn't want to get up at 6 in the morning and go to school. Which was
definitely me.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Stinking school.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in police force, what would you say is like one of the biggest pushbacks that you deal with?
Pushbacks in what sense?
Kind of like in a sense of from a community perspective. What's a pushback that you guys have faced before and had to deal with and kind of like navigate?
Yeah,
or if there are any,
I'm not sure. We're fortunate. We have a good relationship here with our community, and I think we have a relationship where, and this kind of goes back to, you pointing out the fact that there were people that saw me on the street and know who I am.
Yeah.
I live in this community. I tell people this is my home, and I've been here 23 years. Worked for the city for 23 years. I lived with my parents for 18. So, it's funny. Everybody goes, oh, my hometown. Well, that's not really my hometown. I've lived here longer than I lived in my hometown.
Yeah.
And, so this is home. Met my wife here. We've raised, 3 kids in this community. And I think we have the relationship in this community that there are folks that if there was something to come up where there were people that felt like there was something that they needed to significantly push back on, they know how to get a hold of me, and I have the feeling that they would reach out to me first, and we would try to work out whatever that situation is.
Okay.
Now we're not immune to, the murder of George Floyd. There was a lot of criticism levied at police nationally.
Yeah.
We had folks here in town who felt strongly about that issue, that came out and engaged in First Amendment activity. Yeah. I don't know that a large portion of that was aimed directly at our agency. But, the difficult part about police work, unlike other jobs, is the public oftentimes views police officers as police officers, and the officer you ran into in California is the same as the officer you ran into in Ohio. And the hard facts of that is that's simply just not the case. Policing's local. The types of people that people hire in other communities may not be the same as they hire in this community. The type of training offered in other communities may not be the same as in our community.
Yeah.
And so it's a real different level. And that's not to talk negatively about any other police agency out there. It's just to point out the fact that your frame of reference with officers, you may run into something different in a different community because just how things are. And and I will tell you that hiring police officers, the types of people that we hire to wear our badge in the city of Delaware and to have our name on it, which in my mind is really important, because when it says Delaware, that person's representing all of us in the community. That's one of the most important jobs that I have as the police chief.
Is hiring police officers?
Police officers and the types of people that we're hiring.
Yeah.
Do they have a service mindset? Do they have a community-based mindset? Are they going to fit in with our philosophy of, if you take care of the community will take care of you? Because I will tell you, in my personal opinion, a lot of the wrongs that law enforcement have committed across the country and some of the just egregious things that they have done, those officers went through training. Those officers knew what the law was. Those officers oftentimes were wearing body cameras.
Yeah.
There were all types of things in place to prevent that egregious behavior from happening, and it still happened. And in my mind, that's because someone hired the wrong person to do the job.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Are all police officers required to wear a body cam?
So in the city of Delaware, all of our officers have body cameras on, and they wear them throughout their shift.
Okay.
They have policy in place to guide when they turn those on and when they turn them off, and what situations that they tape and what situations they don't.
Okay.
And
are they just like standard GoPros, or are they like a specific?
It's a specific.
Okay.
We used to use a product called WatchGuard. Was out there, and it was ultimately bought out by Motorola. So Motorola makes them now. So it's a specific body worn camera that's made for law enforcement, and there are other companies out there that use Axon that many folks are familiar with. The Taser, Axon makes the Taser. They also have a body-worn camera thing. The thing that I will tell you is, the great thing about the body-worn cameras is, in our community, is 99.9% of the time, they have been found to benefit our officers in complaints because it shows our officers doing exactly what we want them to be doing, and doing the good job that they do each and every day. The big thing about body-worn cameras is they weren't a panacea. They're not a silver bullet. They don't cure all problems.
Right.
There are issues with body-worn cameras that sometimes folks don't think about. They're battery-powered. Sometimes the battery dies. Sometimes the equipment malfunctions. Those things happen.
Yeah.
Much like, I'm sure you've got equipment that we're using.
I've faced malfunctioning equipment.
Yeah,
before.
We're using right now for this podcast, and hopefully we haven't sat here for however long, and you go, "Oh my gosh, this didn't record," right? But that happens.
Yeah.
You also have to understand the limitations of the body-worn camera, or where the body-worn camera is actually better than the officer. So, for instance, they have body-worn cameras out there now that have cameras that can see in the dark. Better than the officer can see in the dark.
Right.
And so the question is if an officer goes into a darkened room and something happens, are we holding them to the standard of what the officer could actually see and perceive, or are we holding them to the standard of what the
camera captured?
Camera captured.
Okay.
That's a complicated issue. I don't think that we can hold that officer to the standard of something that he can't perceive that technology could see better.
I gotcha.
Body cameras can't smell.
Right.
They don't hear necessarily. They don't have peripheral vision. So there are a lot of senses that the camera doesn't have. And so when you watch that camera, for instance, if an officer was dealing with someone and they said they doused themselves in gasoline, and I could smell that gasoline, the fumes were tremendous, and I was worried. I didn't use my taser because I thought that was going to start them on fire, and we're not supposed to. Well, you watch the body-worn camera video, you're not going to smell that gasoline.
Right.
And that's an important fact.
Yeah.
In the totality of the circumstances.
Yeah.
Some of the body-worn cameras, they have depth perception issues, so people can look farther away than they actually are.
Right.
Which gives a person watching it after the fact, like, well, gosh, why did that officer have to respond the way they did? That person was standing clear across the room, and in reality, that person wasn't clear across the room. So, all those things, they're a great tool, but we have to just keep in mind they're not infallible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. For the police force, I had a random question. What's like the culture of the police force?
Oh, that's an interesting question, and I could go a lot of different ways.
I mean, like, does everybody get along with everybody, or is it kind of like, to put it in layman's terms, like a high school thing? You have like your cliques here, your cliques here, your cliques there.
I think we're like any other workplace. There are people that are best buddies at the police department, and then there's people that are friendly. I will tell you that the interesting thing about it's kind of a family atmosphere.
Okay.
Because whether I like you or not, if we're coworkers, when we get sent on a call together, my life may depend on you and your life may depend on me. And that's an interesting dichotomy. And I think that, generally I think our culture is, we have a lot of folks that are community minded. They're community servants. Now and this is when I kind of laugh when you said culture, because it can go a lot of different ways, right? Like, there's a lot of short haircuts.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of tactical pants. So, I mean, the culture is, much like, I assume that doctors and other professions have particular cultures in the way they dress, the way they talk, and those types of things. There is that with law enforcement. But I think generally, at the Delaware Police Department, we have a lot of, the culture is to serve the community to the best of our ability, to try to, get voluntary compliance with the law, try to make Delaware a better place, or improve on the great place it already is. And I think like any other, there's 70 full-time employees at the police department, and so do they, I don't think anybody dislikes anybody, but just like anywhere else, there's probably guys that this person would tell you, I prefer to work with this crew of guys than this crew of guys or gals. And we're not immune. We're all just human beings. We come into work and we do a job just like whether you're going to work at the school or the hospital or the factory. So
Now I did see something the other day, and I was just kind of curious. So I was out doing a photo shoot, and I parked at the parking lot by the PNC Bank, the municipal. Is it the municipal building? Not the new one. It's the one by PNC.
Yeah, the drive-through there. That's the Justice Center.
Justice Center.
The 70 North Union Street. The police department's in the first floor there, and then the second floor is municipal court, which handles all the misdemeanors in Delaware County.
So I was sitting there waiting for a person to show up, and then I saw a cop car pull in. Cop got out, but then another man got out. No shirt, just pants and shoes. Wasn't in cuffs or anything, but like she opened up his trunk or her trunk, and he got his bag, put a shirt on, and then just took him in. What
could that have been?
What could that have been?
Yeah, and which interesting point. I often get asked as the chief of police, Delaware has such a small town feel, even though we're 50,000 here, that sometimes when I'm getting my coffee in the morning, I'll have someone and they'll say, "Hey, Chief, I saw there was a police car on my street last night with the lights on. Do you know what was going on there?" And I'm like, no, I don't. But, well, if the person wasn't in handcuffs, that leads me to believe that they weren't under arrest.
Right.
And so there's a variety of things. It could be somebody who is found themselves in Delaware and has no home or no place to go, and the officer stopped out to help them get bring them in to talk to our social worker to get resources.
Okay.
It could be someone's car broke down somewhere. It could have been a person that was out walking along US 23 and needed assistance.
Okay.
It could be a situation where, the officers got sent to an apartment where two roommates were having an issue, and they're no longer roommates as of that moment, and that person needs a ride down somewhere where they can call a ride. A variety of things. It could also have been a person who was the victim of some type of incident or altercation, and they were coming to the police station to get a statement from them and process that. So
could be a lot of
different
things.
But
I'd never seen something like that before. Which I find it interesting. I invited you to come on my show, and then I'm seeing more cop situations than I ever have before. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to build a lot of questions.
Have you ever, I think it's kind of that same thing that happens when you buy a car
and you start seeing
the
car
you
everywhere.
See them everywhere. You're like, gosh, everybody has one of these. That happens. But there could be a lot of reasons why. One of the things that I always like to point out is we handle anywhere between 30 and 35,000 calls for service a year in the city of Delaware.
Gosh, that's so much.
And that's when I say call for service, that's someone calling the police and asking for something, and us going out there.
Okay.
A very, very small percentage of those end up in an arrest or a citation. And when I say small percentage, like less than 5%.
Okay.
Like 4%.
Okay.
So we're talking about 96, 97% of all our interactions with the public don't involve what we would say a negative connotation of somebody being arrested or somebody receiving a citation.
Okay.
But
as soon as there is an arrest, the entire town knows about it. All the town knows.
It's on Facebook,
right?
It's on What's Up Delaware or what have you. But and I think that's important to point out that there's a community caretaking aspect of the police department that goes on, and it's not what I have to think that a lot of your laymen, residents, or citizens out there, if you said, hey, what do the police do? Well, they arrest people and they write people tickets.
Yeah.
Right? Because I grew up watching cop shows and all that kind of stuff, and that seems to be what. And the reality is we don't do a whole lot of that. Or if that's what we're supposed to be doing all the time, we're not very good at it. That's what I tell people, because we don't do it a lot. But it's more of getting called to situations where people find themselves in trouble,
where they need help,
they
need assistance,
they need assistance, and we come and try to offer suggestions. Sometimes we offer suggestions. Sometimes we offer some stern guidance. Like, you can do this or this can happen, but we try to set things right.
Yeah. Okay. What I don't know if you know this. What's like your top 3 topic of calls you'll get year round?
So it has changed over the years. One of the calls that has historically, or crimes that has historically stayed towards the top for us, is property crimes, thefts.
Oh, okay.
People taking things.
Yeah.
And in large part, a lot of those thefts relate to the narcotics problem that you have in the community. And I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm going to let everybody in on a secret here. If any community tells you they don't have drugs in their community,
it's probably a bigger problem.
It's a bigger problem. Yeah. Right. They're everywhere, and drugs addiction does not discriminate. So that's typically there. We have a lot of residential parts of the city, so domestic complaints, family disputes always rank up there high with things that we handle. What we call behavioral health crises has skyrocketed in the last several years.
Okay.
We deal a lot with folks that find themselves in crisis, and that is not just folks that have a diagnosed mental illness. This is folks that may not have a diagnosed mental illness. They just have reached a point in their life, whether it be they're getting a divorce, they're losing their job, the car got totaled that morning.
Hit a breaking point.
They hit a point where their coping skills just cannot deal with whatever's going on in their life.
Yeah.
And then they engage in some type of behavior that ultimately gets the police called.
Yeah.
And we come in. That seems to be on the rise. Officers deal with that quite a bit.
Okay. Do you how many per se? I mean, I know you said on very low level arrests actually happen because your first step is like to subdue the situation or provide information or on a stern manner give A choice or B choice, which one you want to do. How many arrests in a year?
For us, and we're talking total arrest and what we consider to be arrests, which could be as simple as writing you a citation for having an open container up to, I'm arresting you for robbery or what have you. It ranges. I would say we're somewhere in the range of 1,800 to 2,000 arrests. So it's not a huge number.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I guess it depends on your perspective. If you're from a community where they only make 50, that seems like a huge number. But I would assume comparing that to like the city of Columbus, that's a small number.
Yeah.
Right. And I like to tell people that we're a safe community, and we have everything here that they have everywhere else in the world, just on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in large part, when I get asked, is this a safe community, I always retort with the question, are you a safe person?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you are the type of person that you never lock your car and you leave your $3,000 laptop laying on the seat and, you engage in things, then it might not be safe for you. Some things can happen. And I say that no one should ever be the victim of crime. It is not I want to be careful that I'm not victim shaming there.
Right.
But all of our safety depends on all of us kind of having a safety mindset. And, when I drive, do I have a cell phone in my hand, and am I, eating a Big Mac and drinking, and am I paying attention to what I'm doing? Right.
Yeah.
So, having a safety mindset, me making choices in my life to be safe, makes the whole community safe.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I ask that question when people go, well, is it a safe community? I say, well, are you a safe person?
Yeah.
Right? Because our total safety oftentimes depends upon the folks they're part of the group.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a collective community, Yeah, I like that. Really weird question. Let's say for like the past 5 or 6 years, has anything become normal in the police force or in your position that wouldn't have been normal 5 or 6 years ago? But because culture changes, community changes,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The big one is marijuana.
Okay.
I mean, that's the easiest one. I mean, that's the easiest one I can throw out there. When I started in 1996, marijuana was illegal, complete no-no.
Yeah.
Right? Which also kind of goes to show that my duty is to the law.
Yeah.
Lawful, unlawful. And so they've decided to legalize marijuana. They collectively, we as the state of Ohio, the residents here, it was done by a ballot initiative, has decided to legalize marijuana in certain situations. Well, as soon as that happened, the police department we stopped enforcing that.
Okay.
I mean, the
law.
decision's been made,
now,
right?
Yeah.
It's the same as, I will tell you that growing up in Ohio, I can remember when the speed limits on most of the highways were 65.
Mm-hmm.
It's now 70.
Yeah.
So the rule changed, so we just changed with the rule.
Okay.
So that's been a big change. And that's also where I think that's a good example of where you can have personal views as a police officer, but they don't affect your work persona.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is I'm going to tell you that personally, Adam Moore, I find it very interesting from a public health standpoint that we spent the better part of the 2000s really restricting the use of tobacco, smoking tobacco, and, not having it in businesses, not having it in a workplace, not having it there because of the public health risks of smoking tobacco, that now we're moving towards, but it's okay to smoke marijuana.
That's true. Yeah.
Now those are, cultural trends, things change.
Yeah.
That's me personally. So I'm personally not really on board with that because it doesn't, in my opinion, that doesn't square, right? That has nothing to do with what Chief Moore is going to tell you. Chief Moore is going to tell you it's legal.
Yeah.
And here's where it's legal, and this is how you can use it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Because my duty's to the law when I'm in uniform. It's not to what I think as a personal,
as a civilian, individual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And for me, that's always been a pretty easy dichotomy.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of things, and I tell folks, oftentimes we get questions about what we do and whether things are right or wrong, and whether that's justice or not justice. And I often tell folks, I'm in the lawful and unlawful business.
Yeah.
And in my career, I have seen things that are lawful, but totally awful. And I have seen things happen that are not illegal, but they're not right.
Can you give me an example?
And so, I'll give you an example of where I think personally, again, now I'm speaking for I want to be really clear to the listeners here. I'm speaking for my own personal opinion here, right? Because I'm going to tell you what the law is. Ohio, several years ago, changed their law to say, if you don't pay your child support, we will suspend your driver's license. That's the law. And so officers might pull someone over and have to write them a citation for driving a suspended license because they hadn't paid their child support. Okay, now I'm switching gears. Now it's just Adam Moore, the civilian here.
Yeah.
If your license is suspended, how are you going to go to work to earn money to pay your child support?
Right.
Legally. Right? So I have had to sit and write someone a ticket for driving under suspension for a child support suspension, because that is what the law is. But I'm also sitting there going, I think this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Personally. But the problem is, where we want to be careful is you don't want me coming out into the community always and handling every situation the way I view it as a individual, right? Because my views aren't more important than anybody else's views.
Yeah.
And back to the kind of the point of what I think's important might not be what you think's important in your community, which is why we have a duty to the law. The law is the great equalizer, and everyone should be treated equally in the eyes of the law.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Good. Yeah. I had a question and it just left. What was it? Marijuana, drugs.
I'm kind of an older guy. I'm doing pretty good today. I haven't lost my train of thought yet. So
I know. Well, so with these, I have to be so active listening. Like I'm receiving all this information, and so it's like you'll be talking and sharing it, and I'm like, oh, question, and you'll share, oh, question, and by the time you're done, it's a completely different question.
And I've not been accused of in my career. I've not been accused of being. They say, I think Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit, but I have often been referred to as being loquacious. So I don't know what that says about me, but I'm a little wordy sometimes. So.
Yeah, no, which is great. I mean, that's the whole point of podcasting. So, so just kind of like touching base, marijuana becomes legal it's now. Oh, now I remember the question. Do you find it hard for officers to shift when the law changes, or are they pretty adamant and go, okay, well, that's the law now, so?
No, I think that they change pretty. I mean, the law. As soon as the law changes, they quickly switch. Now, I think what happens is, I think sometimes officers are very in tune to the unintended consequences of the law. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, I think what I mean by that is, for instance, marijuana is now legal.
Mm-hmm.
So we officers knew when summertime gets here, we're going to start to deal with complaints about, hey, my neighbor is sitting on his back porch smoking marijuana and it is coming into the window of my house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to smell marijuana at my house.
Yeah.
I don't want to breathe secondhand marijuana smoke. I want you to go over there and tell him to stop.
Yeah.
And, our response is, well, that's legal behavior over there, right? And so I think when I say officers were in tune to unintended consequences, I think they inherently knew that we're going to have to deal with a whole new set of circumstances when this becomes legal.
Okay.
And,
is there ever any training for officers when a law is changed? Like, is there a quick teaching or go, hey, we used to do it this way. Now we're going to do it this way.
Now we're going to do it this way. And we try to give them that situation that I just gave you. We try to give them direction of how are we going to handle those situations.
Okay.
And in large part, what we try to do is handle those the same way that we handled loud music complaints or things, but when we have neighbor disputes. But, I think that's one of the unintended consequences. You can't always think of every possible outcome when you change a law, but when you change a law, it does have downstream effects.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in those downstream effects, the officers are on the front lines. They end up dealing with those.
Yeah, 100%.
Right, and it goes on a bigger scale. As the chief of police, one of the things that I have to think about. Let's go forget the actual what we do part of it. Let's go to the employment side.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more applicants now are coming in and saying they use CBD and they use marijuana.
Okay,
and the question is currently the city. Because marijuana, and it gets very complicated, but marijuana is not federally legal.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's federal firearms laws and all of our employees have a firearm, we have a policy that you cannot have used marijuana within 12 months of applying to be a police officer with the city of Delaware.
Oh, okay.
And you are not permitted to use it
while you
employed,
are. Okay.
Right? But the question comes up, and as we move on down the road, the question will come up that, well, it's a legal substance in the state of Ohio. Why, as a police officer, do I have to give up my right to use a legal substance when I'm off duty doing my own thing? And
that can be challenging.
That can be challenging, right? And when I talk about kind of thinking things through, again, the law is what the law is and my duties to the law. But, one of the things that I thought about, or I often talk when I talk to the public about, we now, because marijuana is now legal and because it's different than alcohol in the sense that alcohol, you have a blood alcohol content level that goes back to zero at a certain point in time. And we can test that. We've done that for years in drunk driving arrests and that type of thing. But because marijuana use is so new, and because marijuana can be detected in your system much longer, 2-3 weeks out, month out, and you're likely not still under the influence of it a month later. Now the kind of the questions and concerns and where the research is going is how do you quantify impairment? And you can ask the question, how much THC is okay to be in someone's system to be a surgeon?
I'd like that to stay zero. If I'm having surgery,
right? Or to be your child's kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
and if it's legal, is it okay for my child's kindergarten teacher to smoke marijuana all day Saturday and all day Sunday and come to work on Monday? I don't purport to know the answers to all those questions.
Right.
What I'm saying is to your question of how things change and culture changes, when those changes occur, we will now see over the next 10 or 15 years, there will be legislative changes and law changes as we gather more information and as we run into some of those situations.
Yeah. Yeah. On a percentage scale, does Delaware have a drug problem?
Well, my answer is always going to be yes, because I think I told you previously that addictions.
If they say
everywhere.
No, then it's
if
probably
I say
yes.
no, I'm completely just giving you up. I will tell you that in my career, I have seen drug problems ebb and flow.
Okay.
Get worse, get better. For a period of time here in town, much like many other communities across Ohio and across the nation, we were seeing a lot of overdoses from opioids.
Yep.
Again,
which I was leaning towards that, the opioid crisis.
Which, and to your point about changing in the police department and things, all of our officers carry naloxone, which common name is Narcan, or the trade name for Narcan, which counter-affects opioid overdoses.
And that's just like a shot, like an EpiPen?
It's a nasal spray. You shoot it up people's noses, and it immediately stops the effects of an opioid overdose. When I started in 1996, we didn't have that at all.
Right.
In 1996, when I started, crack cocaine was the big epidemic and was the big concern. And there's been periods of time where methamphetamines have been. I lived through the bath salts. I don't know if you were ever aware.
I remember the bath salts.
We had a bath salt situation where people were going and buying bath salts and snorting them and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. So it ebbs and flows. And I don't think it will ever go away.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the police have been dealing with problems with alcohol for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, each of those drugs presents different problems.
Yeah.
But
how do
you?
So what's a situation or scenario, or even it could be just with training? What's a way that you guys help combat that?
So,
like, let's say in Delaware, like if something's being trafficked, or stopping that, or even dealing with the problem as a whole. Like, what are some combatant?
Yeah. Well, we do a lot of different things. One, we participate in the Delaware County Drug Task Force, which again is back to, it's one of these multi-agency organizations where I have personnel from my department on that with personnel from other departments, and they try to work on narcotics and addiction issues and people bringing poison into our community from a county-wide Central Ohio perspective, right? Because there's no force fields between Columbus and here, or Dayton and here, or Toledo and here. There's no magic, dome over the city. So that's enforcement, and then they often try to interdict. They try to stop this stuff before it comes into the community. And so that's, but we also know that we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of that type of problem. So we also need to work towards getting at the addiction issue. And one of the things that we did several years ago is we have in cooperation with the Delaware Morrow Mental Health Recovery Services Board, we have a full-time social worker who's assigned to the police department who can help follow up on some of these situations. Maybe I'm called to your house because you've had a family member who's overdosed. That social worker in the following days can reach out and try to connect you with treatment. And can we get you in somewhere? Can we help you? What's going on in your life? And, ultimately, a lot of times addiction leads to other issues. because it consumes your life. You know, I'm using whatever drug, and I become addicted to it, and now that's all I want to do every day, or that's the focus of my point. Well, the next thing you know, I lose relationships. Maybe I lose my job. Maybe I lose a place to stay. That social worker can try to help some of those other things that have happened.
By plugging in resources.
Right.
So more so creating the solution or helping the solution to overcome any person's struggle or addiction or whatever.
Because if I arrest you and I put you in jail,
what's that going to do?
And you're addicted, you're going to go through withdrawals in jail. You're going to come back out, but that's not going to treat that addiction. You're going to come back out and still be addicted. And I think, we realize that. And so trying to get at some of those root causes of the problem so we don't get to that arrest point is really kind of crucial. And, we work with a lot of community partners. We work with our Narcan program. I said our officers all have Narcan. We work with the Delaware General Health District to support that program. We certainly work with Grady Memorial Hospital, the provider.
Okay.
There are a lot of different addiction providers in town. So we try to really attack that problem in multiple ways, right? We do education in the school system with our SROs about the dangers of getting involved with addictive substances. So there's an education piece. So we're really trying to combat it any way and every way we can. We also run a program called Hidden in Plain Sight, which is kind of unique. We have all of the parents. We'll put on a public presentation for them, and we'll talk about current trends with drugs and narcotics and addictions in young people. And then we have an entire youth bedroom set up, like a teenager's bedroom, full of all kinds of things that are, quote, hidden in plain sight.
Okay.
And we allow the parents to go through there and say, hey, if you saw that, take a look at this room and identified, do you think there's drug use going on here? And it amazes parents the stuff that's laying right out in the open and might be in their child's room that
they're just not aware of.
They're just not aware of.
Okay.
So we try to educate parents to stay on top of it so that they can get ahead of it. I mean, with just a variety of different things that we do to try to combat that.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of answers my follow-up question was like, what are partnerships you have with the community? So in regards to like teaching about drugs and just helping parents become more aware and providing resources and counseling and all these things, we're gearing towards the end of kind of just like wrapping this up, but what are some partnerships that help create the community more, like a lot that allows the community to build and thrive? And
I'm very proud to say that if you are involved in any type of social issue, concern in the city of Delaware, and you're part of a group that's working to address that, whether that be homelessness issues, hunger issues, addiction issues, the whole gamut of social concerns, I'm proud to say that if you show up at a meeting, 90% of the time, there's going to be somebody from the Delaware Police Department there, or if not, they'll be at the next. We are very connected, and we have a very good social network with our other providers. We have some really good providers in this county, but just some examples that we are involved in. We're involved in the multi-agency crisis intervention team, and that's a group that comes together to talk about folks in our community that may be experiencing some mental health challenges that go into crisis, and how can we all work together to make a better outcome for that person. And I can give you a specific example of that. This has been probably over 8 to 10 years ago, but we had a young man in town that had some significant mental illness and was prompting a lot of police runs and ambulance runs to his house, having difficulties in school, ultimately led to some violent behavior. And he was living single mother. She had 2 boys. We were able to bring that Massett team together, and what ultimately came out of that is the mental health community had found a placement for him to get treatment, but it was in Toledo, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Mom is a single mom just trying to make ends meet. I think she had a part-time job. She had a car that probably wouldn't make it down to the stop sign and back on any given day.
Yeah.
And so what happened is she knew that they had a place for him to go. They said, Mom, you just got to get him to this place in Toledo and get him checked in, and he can have some treatment. And she's, how can I get to Toledo? I can barely get to the other side. So what happens in that Massett team is we're all sitting in there, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, he needs a ride to Toledo. That's what's holding us back right now.
Yeah.
I have cars, lots of cars.
Yeah.
And people to drive them.
Yeah.
And Mom, is it okay if an officer from the police department was to drive your son to Toledo, drive you to Toledo, get this person checked in? Yes. Okay, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Mental health, will that work with you? Yeah, we worked together. We did that. We ultimately drove that young man up, got him to a hospital. He got in treatment. We don't have any other interactions with him at all. He's back in the community. He's employed. He's doing the right things. But it's that team approach of having everybody at the table.
Right.
And saying, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and what tools do we each bring to solve this?
Right. Yeah.
So we're involved in a lot of. We work with the warming center in town.
The what?
The warming center that opens up at the.
Oh, is that for like during the winter months?
During the winter months,
people
yes,
at least have a warm spot.
We work with those folks. I mean, we anywhere we can help. Try to be part of the solution. We're typically involved in.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. I love it. Is there anything else you want to share or?
No, other than thank you for the opportunity. I didn't wear a uniform today because I want everybody to know that we've got some really good people down at the police department working. And I often say, it's a privilege to be a police officer and to be that person that gets called on someone's worst day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a privilege to be the chief, and for me to get to spend my days with ordinary people that do extraordinary things
right
in a split second. But I didn't wear a uniform today because I want to always remind folks that those are ordinary. Their moms, their dads, their brothers, their sisters. They're ordinary people that are just going about their lives. They've decided to engage in public service, but at a moment's notice, they're willing to do extraordinary things on your behalf. And it's been my pleasure for the last 30 years to be able to be part of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yep. Cool. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your knowledge and story and wisdom. And hope y'all enjoy this. As always, go to bearsdon'tfly.com or subscribe on, this is a long one, YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. All the things.
All the things. All the
good
technology
deal.
out there.
Well, thanks, Chief, and it was good talking with you.
Yeah.